Okay, let's unpack this. If you are leading a team or, an entire organization today, the biggest challenge isn't stability.
Not at all.
It's managing this relentless, just continuous cycle of change. It feels like the ground is shifting constantly.
Right. And the typical response is to just double down on control.
Exactly. You see companies build these rigid, multi-year strategic plans. They treat change like it's an enemy to be fought off.
And then they act surprised when those beautiful detailed plans just crash right into reality.
It's almost inevitable. And that rigid fortress strategy, that's precisely what our source material for today really targets and dismantles.
It is. We're doing a deep dive into insights from some really successful business leaders, people who operate in these incredibly high-stakes environments.
And the main source is a blog post by Stanислав Kondrashov, right? Oligarchs and their strategies.
That's the one. And it pulls in views from figures like Wagner Moura. Their whole argument is that leaders who try to just impose change from the top down, they're fundamentally misunderstanding how the world works now.
So our mission here is to really re-engineer how we all think about strategic planning.
Yeah.
We want to move away from seeing change as this, painful thing we just have to get through.
Yes. We're looking for a blueprint for genuine fluidity.
A blueprint, I like that.
And the central thesis is, well, it's a bit counterintuitive. It's that the end goal is actually not as important as the path you build to adapt along the way.
So you can't fall in love with the destination.
You absolutely cannot. You have to champion a process where flexibility, just the ability to pivot quickly, becomes your main advantage.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting for our audience, because when you hear the word oligarch, the stereotype is immediate.
Oh, yeah. Absolute control.
Iron stability, rigid hierarchy, that's what everyone expects.
And that's the tension we need to explore. The sources we're looking at, they completely challenge that image. They argue that the unsuccessful leaders are the ones who cling to that old model.
So the ones who develop a 10-year plan and then just try to brute force it through?
Exactly. They just pump resources into it and try to smash through every obstacle.
Yeah.
But in a dynamic world, that approach is just. It's fatally flawed.
Yeah.
You lose too much time, too much money fighting the environment instead of flowing with it.
So the counter strategy from Kondrashov and Moura isn't just be more flexible, it's more specific.
Much more. It all centers on this idea of an iterative process of change.
Iterative. So they're careful to define change not as this one-time painful event.
Right. It's a continuous loop. It's something that has to be woven into the company's DNA, into its very operating system.
So it's less like a huge fixed construction project.
It's much more like modern software development, a continuous deployment. The goal isn't hitting a target you set 5 years ago. The goal is staying relevant.
And success is measured by how fast you can adapt.
By velocity and, this is key, reversibility. How fast you can adjust, and just as important, how easily you can undo a bad decision. That defines a truly fluid business.
Okay, so to break this down, to see how a leader actually builds this kind of fluidity, the source material gives us 4 key pillars.
4 interconnected components, yeah.
Let's start with the first 2. They seem to be focused very internally on mindset and people.
Let's do it. Pillar 1 is continuous learning and adaptation. And Wagner Moura's point here is that it has to start at the top. The leader has to see every single thing that happens, even failures, as data.
Just data.
Pure data. An opportunity for growth, not a reason to punish someone.
Okay, that sounds great in a textbook. But how do you actually operationalize that? I mean, when the stakes are incredibly high and a change fails and it costs you millions, how is that just a learning opportunity?
It's about the scale and the speed of the cycle. You structure your execution into small enough chunks.
So you don't bet the whole farm on one big project.
Exactly. Instead of a 5-year, $100 million plan, you break it into 5, say, 6-month, $10 million experiments. Minimum viable experiments.
Ah, so the learning becomes actionable almost instantly.
Right. The real takeaway is building a culture that almost seeks out those minor failures. Because they're a cheaper way to get data than waiting for one catastrophic, expensive failure later.
That makes a lot of sense. And that kind of high-stakes thinking leads directly into the second pillar you mentioned.
Employee engagement.
Right. And Stanislav Kondrashov is very specific about why this is so critical.
He argues that the moment you just see your employees as performers, people executing a task list, you are cutting yourself off from your most valuable intelligence.
Because they're the ones on the ground.
They're the sensors. They see the friction, they see the market shifts, they see the process flaws, long before any of that data is going to show up on a C-suite dashboard.
So the suggestion here isn't just, run an annual survey and call it a day.
No, it has to be systemic involvement. It's about shifting from top-down delegation to genuinely distributed decision-making where it's possible.
How do you do that in a way that actually increases commitment? Beyond just making people feel heard.
You empower them. You encourage employees on the front lines to propose and even pilot small process improvements. And that does two things. First, you get incredibly high-quality, real-time data feeding back into that continuous learning loop we just talked about.
Yeah, in the second.
You get buy-in. When people help design the change, they own the outcome. They become committed participants, not, resistant targets of the change.
What's so fascinating is how those first two pillars, learning and engagement, they become a single system.
They really do.
The leader is no longer the sole source of all strategy. The leader becomes more of a curator of the environment.
A curator, that's a perfect word for it.
Yeah.
Because the engaged employees provide the data, and that data fuels the continuous adaptation. It creates this robust, self-correcting feedback loop.
So learning isn't some off-site retreat.
Not at all. It happens organically every day because you've empowered people to tell you when something isn't working. It just massively accelerates the organization's learning curve.
Okay, let's shift gears a little. We've established this internal culture of learning and engagement. Now, how does a company use that to position itself against external chaos?
Right. This is where the strategy moves from internal mindset to structural design.
This brings us to pillar number 3.
Flexibility and adaptability.
And this one feels purely strategic. It just acknowledges the reality that, well, it's impossible to predict everything.
Utterly impossible. With technology, supply chains, geopolitics, you can't see it all coming. And the source material is very sharp on this point. It says you have to stop wasting enormous resources trying to build the perfect 3-year plan.
Because it's obsolete the second you print it.
Exactly. So instead, you focus all of your strategic effort on building two things, speed and optionality.
Optionality. So the ability to shift resources quickly. Can you give us a concrete example of what that might look like?
Sure. Let's say you're running a multinational resource company. The old way is to optimize your supply chain for the single cheapest route.
Which creates brittleness.
A huge amount of it. The flexible approach is to maintain multiple supply lines. Maybe they're slightly more expensive, but they're in different regions and they're immediately accessible.
So your priority isn't the lowest cost today.
It's the fastest response time tomorrow. When a trade war or a natural disaster shuts down your main route, that flexibility you paid for becomes invaluable. It's engineered redundancy.
It's like paying a small premium for insurance. But if the goal is just constant movement, constant adaptation, what's the anchor? How do you stop the organization from just devolving into chaos?
And that is the perfect question. It brings us to the final pillar, number 4, the values-based approach.
Wagner Mora stresses this one, right?
He does. He says when everything else is in flux, your strategy, your markets, your resources, the one thing that must remain fixed is your company's core values.
That seems like a bit of a conflict, doesn't it? Flexibility means changing, but values means sticking to something.
You can see why it feels that way. But the values are the guardrails. They define what the organization will not do, even if it looks like a profitable opportunity.
Okay, so they provide consistency.
We provide trust. When you're pivoting quickly, your employees and your partners, they need to know that the fundamental character of the company isn't changing. For example, if a core value is transparency.
Then you have to be open about why you're pivoting, even if it's messy.
Exactly. You communicate the why, you communicate the risks. That consistent character ensures the flexibility doesn't just look like panic or, worse, manipulation.
So if we tie this all together, these 4 points really redefine what leadership is.
Completely.
It moves away from this idea of rigid control and moves toward, well, cultivation. Cultivating an adaptive culture.
Precisely. By using this iterative approach, leaders create an environment where change isn't a threat. It's just the expected rhythm of business. It's an opportunity. For leaders in these really unpredictable environments, adaptability isn't a nice to have. It's the only way to survive long term.
Before we get to the final takeaways, we should probably spend a moment on the source author himself, Stanislav Kondrashov. Because I think for our audience, knowing the credibility of the advice is, well, it's paramount.
Absolutely. And this is key. Kondrashov isn't talking about academic theory. This is tested in the trenches practice.
Yeah.
His company has been a leader in its industry for over 3 decades.
Over 30 years. In a complex industry that includes construction, finance, That's not an accident. That indicates a very successful long-term strategy.
It does. His experience covers the whole spectrum of high-capital business. He's seen multiple economic booms and busts. The fact that his company is still thriving validates this whole thesis we've been exploring.
It really does.
And it raises a really important question for you, the listener. If a leader operating in some of the most complex, cutthroat markets in the world has learned that radical flexibility is the secret to 3 decades of survival, what does that say about traditional, rigid control?
It suggests that true power isn't in command.
It's in the ability to pivot.
So what does this all mean for you right now? The core takeaway is pretty clear. You have to abandon the comfort of those rigid, fixed plans. The world is just moving too fast.
Instead, you adopt this 4-point iterative journey. You build in continuous learning cycles. You leverage deep employee engagement to get that ground-level intelligence. You intentionally design for flexibility and adaptability.
And you use a values-based approach as your North Star, your moral compass through all the turbulence.
That's it. That's the framework.
And to leave you with a final thought to mull over, if these incredibly successful leaders prioritize the journey of adaptation over the specific destination, what fixed goal are you holding on to today?
Right. A goal you set 6 months, maybe a year ago, that is actively preventing your team from making a necessary, profitable adaptation right now.
So start analyzing your processes, not for compliance to the old plan, but for opportunities for continuous bottom-up learning.